Hello everyone, this is Shannon from That's So Po, and today I'm doing a review of Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno-Garcia, which is a Gothic horror novel set in the 1950s in Mexico that does some pretty amazing things. I definitely loved this book. I have so much about it that I think is really well done. So first I'm going to just tell you what the story is about, and then I'll talk about all of the aspects of the story that I think were so well done. Also, in addition to this review, I highly recommend that you check out some Own Voices Mexican reviewers. I'll link a couple down below. I really loved Andrea at bookramble as well as Cynthia at BookWhimsy's review of this, especially because they talk about not just why they love the book, but kind of also why the Mexican atmosphere in it was so great. So first, let me tell you what the story is about. So this book is set in the 1950s in Mexico, and we follow Noemi, who lives in Mexico City. She's a socialite, she's beautiful, she's smart, she's flirty, she loves going to parties, and she lives this very glamorous life. However, she gets a letter from her cousin, Catalina, who recently married a very mysterious man, a man who is of British descent and lives up in the mountains in a rural area with the rest of his family in a crumbling Victorian mansion. And something is going on there that is making her cousin see things. So Noemi decides to go and visit High Place, this Victorian mansion, to check on what's going on with her cousin, see if she can help, and she discovers that there is a lot going on. So now let me talk about some of the aspects that I really loved this book for. There were so many things about this that were well done, starting with the Gothic genre. If you know Silvia Moreno-Garcia's work, you'll know that she often will take different literary genres and write a book in that genre. It's sort of a thing that she does, and I think she does such a great job with the Gothic genre. Recently, I have been reading Monsters, She Wrote by Lisa Kröger and Melanie Anderson, which is sort of a history of women writing horror. And in it, they talk about what makes something a Gothic novel. And every one of those aspects, this book, Mexican Gothic, hits so well. So they talk about having a virtuous young woman who often faints or falls unconscious. And in this story, the cousin, Catalina, is just such a woman. She's very sweet, and when Noemi goes to visit High Place, she discovers that Catalina is often unconscious and unable to do anything. Another thing is kind of a villainous, handsome, sinister man who is foreign and maybe out for money. And in this we have Catalina's husband, Virgil Doyle. His family is British, and he is somebody who is looking to help out his family's finances so that they can reopen their silver mine and regain some of their wealth and power. We also have crumbling, once majestic homes. And in this, the Doyle's home, this Victorian mansion, is something that has seen better days. It's sort of falling apart. Definitely a creepy atmosphere. And last, we have some sort of supernatural being that makes life difficult. And there's a lot going on here that seems supernatural that as we go forward makes life very difficult for Catalina and Noemi. In addition to hitting all of these points of what makes something a Gothic novel, I also saw a lot of nods to specific Gothic novels that I have read before. I am not the most widely read in terms of Gothic novels, so I think if you've read more Gothic works, you'll see even more. But I definitely saw a lot of this book addressing and in conversation with things like The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman, which is about a woman who is stressed out, and her doctor prescribes that she goes and lives in a remote house that has some yellow wallpaper, and she's totally isolated and starts to have some maybe psychological issues. Another one is My Cousin Rachel by Daphne du Maurier, which has a lot about sort of foreign people, has a lot about a cousin coming to visit, has a lot about tea and tisanes and things like that. So there's a lot of nods to both of these novels. And I think if I were more widely read, I would see even more books that are being addressed in this novel. Another aspect of this book that I think was so well done was the creepy atmosphere. I really felt as I was reading this book how creepy it was, just this isolated mansion up on this mountaintop. There's rain and there's mist. There's a graveyard that a lot of scenes happen in. There's this darkness, this dim atmosphere, this quiet, this hush. There's so much of this creepy atmosphere going on, as well as all of the very creepy supernatural things that are happening inside of the house that make it so atmospheric. I would say that the first 60% of this book really is just that Gothic atmosphere, although the last 40% does verge into some horror. So if you have any issues with like body horror, things like that, definitely go in prepared and knowing that it does verge onto a lot of body horror type of issues. But I just really thought that the atmosphere was so well done, and even though I'm very squeamish myself, I was able to handle the creepier, more graphic parts in the end of the book. But if you're sensitive, just be aware. Another thing I loved about this book was the way it dealt with colonialism and the history of colonization in Mexico. So this book in particular is looking at the interactions between these British expats who have moved to Mexico in order to open up a silver mine, and those interactions between them and the native population. And there's so much in here about the way that the indigenous people, as well as just the general Mexican people, have been exploited by foreigners, especially by those who are looking to sort of rob the land of its riches. And in this British Doyle family has very much done this. They've opened a silver mine generations back, and they have really used the local labor, even when it was killing people, to work in these mines in great numbers in order to extract wealth for themselves. And there's no connection between them and the real land. The Doyles, they built a Victorian mansion. They brought over soil from England to grow their own plants. They never learned Spanish. There's so much here about them as the colonizers that I think was really interesting, and kind of delving into an interesting part of the history of colonization in Mexico, not just with the Spanish back in the 1500s, but even kind of continuing into the 1800s. And there's a lot in here talking about how the revolution in the 1920s in Mexico stopped a lot of their power and really robbed the Doyles of that ability to exploit people and utilize the local population and make money off of their silver mines. So I thought all of that discussion was really, really interesting. A related topic that this book delved into is that of eugenics and racism. So unsurprisingly, the Doyles are very racist. They are very much about the pure bloodlines. They're about the kind of superior races, about the idea that there are different attributes that make somebody a better human being than others. And it's very interesting in this because the patriarch of the family, this old man, Howard Doyle, is very much the type who has tons of books in his library about eugenics, and he gets into discussions, into arguments about this with Noemi over dinner, because Noemi's actually somebody who has studied anthropology. She has a lot of thoughts on many of these topics, and it becomes sort of an explicit part of the story to discuss the ideas of racism and of eugenics, and especially why people are trying to use this idea to kind of propagate their own power. I really, when I was reading this the first time, I really was reminded of a lot of what Ibram X. Kendi talks about in How to Be an Anti-Racist, about how the idea of race is a construct and it is something that has been created to justify a lot of power inequities. And I really, really saw that in this book. Not just that, but he also relates racism to something like a cancer, something that can grow in us and if left unchecked can just completely spread and destroy us. And so we have to root it out, we have to get rid of it. But sometimes even that fight is something that is so difficult, and even once you remove it, there's always that possibility that it could grow back. So much of that imagery and so much of that talk about what racism is and how it can infect and rot who we are, I really loved how all of that was represented in this fictional story, and just both explicitly as well as through imagery brought it very much to mind. And the last aspect of this book that I thought was done so well was that of tackling the idea of gaslighting and really having a feminist bent on the Gothic genre. So if you're not familiar with it, gaslighting, according to Psychology Today, is a tactic in which a person or entity, in order to gain more power, makes a victim question their reality. And I'll have a link to that below if you want to read some of the kind of warning signs that Psychology Today talks about. This book very much addresses the idea of gaslighting because in the story we have both Noemi and Catalina who are experiencing some pretty strange and horrific things, and we have the Doyle family who is very patriarchal and very much about power, trying to make them feel as if they're just being weak-willed women who imagine things and very much trying to undermine their lived experiences, their difficulties that they face, telling them that it's all just them being kind of hysterical women. So I really loved the way that Silvia Moreno-Garcia talks about gaslighting, especially because there's so much of the Gothic genre that is a little bit tangential to gaslighting. And so this very feminist take that she does looks at the way that these women are treated, but also gives us a very, very strong main character, Noemi, who is not about to allow herself to be gaslit. She is somebody who is bold, she is loud, she is somebody who flirts, who jokes, who argues. She's someone who is modern and new. She wears fashionable dresses, she smokes, she goes and does stuff on her own. And when this Doyle family tries to undermine her, criticizes her constantly, tries to get her to stop being herself, she is so unwilling to allow them that power. And I just really loved that very feminist take on this issue. So it was such a fun thing to read. So overall, I think that Mexican Gothic is such a beautifully atmospheric book that takes on the Gothic genre and puts a very feminist and anti-racist twist on it. I think that this book has a lot of beautiful imagery, a lot of interesting themes, and is really quite creepy. So if any of you have read this book, if you're interested in reading it, if you have any thoughts, any comments, any recommendations, anything at all, go ahead and leave me a comment down below.